Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Girls' Education Day at the Global Education Summit. My name's Hannah Vaughan-Jones. It is my privilege to be moderating this opening event that's being hosted by the flagship programme of the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, the Girls' Education Challenge. Now, this week, state leaders in the global education community will be making commitments to the Global Partnership for Education's $5 billion target. That's for 2021 to 25. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, along with Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, are co-hosting this high-level summit, which aims to transform education systems in up to 90 countries, and in turn then transform the lives of more than 1 billion girls and boys globally. And has championed girls' education as the key to preventing exploitation and unlocking potential. And this commitment can be seen in the FCDO's Girls' Education Challenge, which aims to improve the educational opportunities for more than 1.5 million marginalised girls in 17 countries across the world. So today, the Girls' Education Challenge, or the GEC as it will be referred to, is hosting Girls' Education Day. It brings together 10 different events that will cover a variety of topics, including what gender transformative education really looks like, delivering girls' education in fragile contexts, and transforming social norms to end child marriage, and that's to name just a few. So now I'd like to introduce two people who are going to be central to the Girls' Education Challenge and to today's session. Sharon Tao is Education Director and Team Leader of the GEC, and David Armstrong is Partner at PwC, leader of PwC's International Development Team, and contract holder for the GEC. So Sharon, let's come to you first. How did the Girls' Education Challenge come about hosting Girls' Education Day at the Global Education Summit? That's GEC hosting GED at the GES, and I'm the only one who has to say that. Over to you, Sharon.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you for doing such a good job with all the acronyms. Really, what happened is while we were preparing our individual side events for the run-up to the Global Education Summit, we noted a number of other important side events that were focusing on girls' education, organized by partners we had worked with on the GEC, as well as partners we've always admired in the girls' education sphere. So we reached out to all of these different partners and proposed that we collaborate and pool our collective events into a dedicated Girls' Education Day. And this now allows any summit participant or anyone in general who is interested in girls' education to have a sort of one-stop shop in which all of today's events will be discussing and supporting the Global Partnership for Education's case for investment in girls' education. So for anyone who not already has the program and the links to the 9 events, please feel free to go to the GEC website at girlseducationchallenge.org and you can link up to those events there.
Fantastic. Okay, now, as we are preparing our own individual, hang on, where are we? Hang on, we're going to go to David before we come back to you, Sharon. And you're going to tell us, David, I think, what we have to look forward to from the GEC. Of course, the GEC is conveners of Girls' Education Day and, of course, hosts of this opening session. So, David, welcome to you and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Look, I've had the great pleasure and privilege, Hannah, of being involved in GEC since we began the journey with FCDO, which is way back in 2012. And I have to say there's been lots of highs through that time, and I also have to say, you know, some lows too that we've had to deal with. But I remain super proud about the achievements and the impact that the programme has had. And actually, I remain very proud of the UK government's leadership in this whole area of global girls' education. I'm very excited, Hannah, about this session today, the first of 10 sessions throughout the day, as Sharon has said. And I'm partly excited because I think we've got a proper expert panel. And we've got Sally from FCDO and Tara from UNGAI, Jamie from USAID and Elaine from UCL. And for me, this is all about drawing the lessons from the journey we've been on, particularly over the last year and a half with GEC. It's all about evidence, best practice and what works as we seek to build back better, faster and fairer for marginalised girls throughout the world. So thanks, Hannah, to you for hosting, and thanks everybody for being involved.
Thank you very much, David. Now, some housekeeping just before we get into the details. David, I believe we are recording this event and we'll be replaying it at the end of Girls' Education Day. That's going to be at about 6 p.m. London time, BST. And there's going to be hopefully some participants joining us from North America. So that's why it's recorded, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm conscious it's just gone noon here in the UK, but it's sleepy time elsewhere in the world. So we just want to give people an opportunity to log on. They can do that on YouTube as well if they, even if they miss the 6 p.m. session this evening.
Okay, yeah, I think it's something like 4 a.m. at the moment on the West Coast. So it's a bit of a stretch to expect people to tune in, no matter how passionate they are about the subject matter itself. And we will also be uploading the recording to the GEC YouTube channel as well. So you can always check back there if you can't join us live as well. Now, I'd also like to mention that unfortunately, we're not going to have time for a dedicated question and answer Q&A session with our audience. However, if you are in the audience or joining us now and you have a really pressing question that you want to get to one of our speakers, please do use the Q&A chat function, and I will do my very best to get the best questions to the best people, time permitting as well. David, any other housekeeping issues to note?
I mean, the only other thing I'd say, Hannah, is that part of this day is about advocacy and raising awareness about the issues. So if participants are linked into Twitter, LinkedIn, other social media platforms, you'll already have seen some activity. Please do amplify and repost to get the messages out.
Yeah, okay, so if you are on Twitter, please do keep an eye on the GEC Twitter account. We're going to be tweeting throughout the day. So if participants could like and retweet all of those tweets that you see, we'd be very, very grateful. And as David said, if you're on LinkedIn as well, there'll be lots of posts there about Girls Education Day. So do repost what you see. Wonderful stuff. So now, without further ado, we'd like to officially open Girls Education Day at the Global Education Summit by inviting our panelists to give their reflections on why they believe girls' education is so important. Now, just to let you all know, we will be returning to the speakers, the panelists, throughout the course of the session so that they can provide their reflections and their feedback on the points that have just been made by other participants as well. So kicking things off then, Sally Gear is Head of Profession for Education at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And Sally, over to you first, your personal or perhaps even your organisational perspective of why girls' education is so important.
Great, thank you, Hannah, and thanks, David. So it's a great pleasure and honour to be at this event today, and just so fantastic to have a whole day dedicated to girls' education. So I've been working on girls' education long enough to remember I had to fight to get a half-an-hour lunchtime slot at an education day once. So this is a great step forward. So well done, everyone on the call and everyone who's in the audience, because I know you're committed. So on a very personal basis, I've worked on girls' education prior to my career in FCDO, and so coming up to nearly 20 years. So this is has been a passion of mine for many, many years. Even when I've been doing different roles, I've certainly kept in touch with the community. So it's just a great pleasure to see the high profile that girls' education is getting these days. Obviously, from FCDO's perspective, it's no surprise that clearly a lot of the communications that have gone out from us recently have really demonstrated from the highest level, from the prime ministerial level, the huge commitment to girls' education, and not just getting girls in school, but also ensuring that they learn in school, which is the key challenge, as we know. And I know that's something the Girls' Education Challenge has been working with over the last nearly 10 years now, not quite, but and we are still in that situation. So, I mean, again, you're a very well-informed audience, and so I don't want to sort of tell obvious things to people, but we know that girls' education is both important, the right thing to do for girls themselves, of course it is, but also the wider benefits. There's lots of evidence out there that we now know that a child whose mother can read is much more likely to live beyond the age of 5 years. So there's health benefits. They're twice as likely to attend schools themselves if they've been a daughter or a son, actually, of an educated mother, and 50% more likely to be immunised. And the list goes on about the benefits. So not only, as we know, this is a human rights issue, this is also an issue that benefits the world, which is why I've been so committed to it over the last couple of decades. unfortunately, and I know others on the call will be talking about this, now more than ever is the time to really focus on the importance of educating girls. And this is because we've all lived through, and we're still living through in many of our countries. And I want to just emphasize that point today, that we're not too jubilant to talking about post-pandemic. Well, we're not. There's schools shut still in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and as we know, also in South Asia. So we're certainly still in the midst of the impact on education and the health, also, and obviously the health mortality disaster that's also hit us. So we also are beginning to pick up the evidence that actually, unsurprisingly, the impact of the pandemic has had a worse effect on the poorest and most marginalised, and many of those, of course, are girls. And the evidence is on learning is going to be emerging. We still haven't got all of it yet, but it's certainly going to be coming out. We've got, project data, but not the sort of global UIS data yet, but that is coming out, and it's not looking great at all. So not only have all children been disadvantaged, girls in particular have, and I've already run over my 3 minutes, so I should pass on. You can see how passionate I am about it, so I will stop and I'll come back later. Thanks, Hannah.
Exactly. The passion is wonderful, and it's wonderful to see it and hear it in your voice as well. And Sally, we'll come back and I'm sure you'll be able to sort of re-emphasise some of the points you've made as well. But in the meantime, I'd like to hand over to Jamie Oberlander, who's Education Officer and Acting Director of USAID Somalia's Office for Social Services. Jamie, over to you, and why you think, particularly in your line of work, girls' education is so very important.
Thank you, Hannah. And it's a real privilege to be beaming in from Nairobi, Kenya today. I'll add to the laundry list of evidence that Sally just mentioned, but start with a personal story. And that is, in Pakistan, during my first tour with USAID, I had the opportunity to meet a recipient of one of USAID's scholarship programs, and she was literally shaking with excitement to thank USAID for the scholarship that enabled her to complete her bachelor's degree. But what stuck with me most was that this scholarship also enabled her to put her younger brother and younger sister through school as well. And so USAID was able to educate 3 young people through this one scholarship. From an organizational perspective, in the case of USAID Somalia, USAID's strategic objective in Somalia is to support Somalia and its people to better withstand shocks and to increasingly contribute to their own development. And building human capital of women is central to achieving this objective. Evidence demonstrates that households with empowered women have greater dietary diversity and make greater or healthier food choices for their family. And the greatest indicator for a household's ability to respond to food security shocks is participation in secondary education. Now, the education situation in Somalia is dire. Currently, only 25% of school-aged girls are enrolled in primary school. So USAID is proud to partner with UKAID on the Adolescent Girls Education Somalia program. Together, we'll reach nearly 80,000 adolescent girls and young women with educational opportunities. And these are in areas that are disproportionately impacted by climate-related disasters and by protracted conflict, including rule by extremist groups. So in Somalia and globally, USAID is really working to address the inequities that have come out of the COVID-19 pandemic in education, and particularly looking to build back better with more resilient and more equitable systems, education systems, including those that benefit adolescent girls and young women. Back to you.
Jamie, thank you so much. I'd like to now invite Antara Ganguly, who's the head of secretariat at the UN Girls Education Initiative. Antara, the same question goes to you then, if you can just give us your perspective on the need and the importance of girls' education.
Thank you, Hannah, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone out there. Apologies, the sun is rising in New York, so there's a shadow on my face. So let's start with where we are. There are 258 million children out of school, and these children are more likely to be girls than boys globally. And as we move to secondary school, the gap increases. So the reason girls' education is important is because education is a fundamental human right, and so is gender equality. So we need girls in school because it is their right to be in school. Secondly, as colleagues have pointed out before me, when girls are in school, they are less likely to be victim and targets of harmful practices like child marriage, like FGM. I was looking at data from UNFPA. We know that there are 650 million young women in the world today who were married when they were children. And UNFPA and UNICEF predict that this number is going to increase by 20% as a result of COVID. This is because these children have been out of schools, and it proves what education actors and gender equality actors have been saying for quite some time now, that if there is anything like a silver bullet to achieve gender equality and empower girls, it's education, a quality gender responsive education. And then finally, I would add, as a practitioner on gender equality for the last 20 years, we need to look at not just girls' education, but gender equality in education. And if we are able to achieve gender responsive, or dare I say, gender transformative education, I think that is the closest we can come to achieving gender equality globally, but also in countries. I'll stop there for now.
And Tara, thanks very much indeed. And last but by no means least, we're going to go over to Elaine Untitled, who is the Professor of Education and International Development at UCL, that's University College London Institute of Education. Elaine, same question to you then. Why within your organisation, or indeed personally, is girls' education so important?
Thanks, Hannah. And again, it's so wonderful to be on this panel and to listen to others and to be able to talk on this event. I'm going to introduce an even bigger abstract framing, I guess, to some of the points others have made. I think for me, girls' lack of education is associated with so many grave injustices and forms of violence and oppression. And I think it's these that we need to confront and to change. Sometimes they're grouped together around terms like gender or intersecting inequalities. And I think they highlight the many economic, political, social, cultural, and health relationships in play. So girls' lack of education highlights widespread gender inequalities and how those intersect with other inequalities of race or class, ethnicity, and all kinds of forms of unequal power, which the examples people have been giving show. So one part of addressing all those injustices is to work to support girls' access to school and their quality of learning, and to think about what girls experience in and through school. Particular forms of equity, protection from violence, and full realization of human rights. These current terrible crises we're living through associated with COVID and climate change, I think they're really important places to start and take forward work that has been relatively small and really amplify it. There's no guarantee that girls' schooling will undo all the terrible inequalities in the world. But I think it's a very good place to start from in trying to address those. And I think there's so much to be learned from working well in supporting girls' education, women's rights, gender equality, and addressing intersecting inequalities. We all need to work together on those themes. For me, the importance of girls' education is twofold. It's a matter of social justice, like all initiatives to extend good quality education. And it's got a special kind of importance because working in this area, we can deepen our engagement with addressing wider gender and other injustices and give solidarity and support to processes of equality and change. Lifelong learning and supporting lifelong learning is a way of connecting each other, and for me that's the passion and the thing to work on.
Great. Thank you so much, Elaine. And we've got just a bit of time to get a bit of feedback from the other panelists as well, and what you've all just heard. Sally, I saw you sort of nodding along as Elaine was talking there. The overall theme seems to be that, you know, education, or indeed the lack of education, is the stem or fundamental to so many other inequalities and inequities that girls experience around the world. Sally, would you agree with that?
I'm trying to come off mute, sorry. Yeah, no, of course. Absolutely, no. And I think Elaine has obviously put it very eloquently. And I think this point about working with girls who and getting girls back into school is a way to really understand all those other inequalities as well. You know, it's a sort of, so it's almost like it's a window, makes it sound superficial, but, you know, obviously getting girls into school, the practical thing, and ensuring that they have a decent quality education, and also, as others have touched on, that education is empowering, because we don't want girls to go into school and have a really bad experience, because that's not going to create what you know, that's empowerment. But at the same time, working with girls, you understand all the other challenges and barriers that are faced. So it can be a route in. And that's what the Girls' Education Challenge has tried to do, actually, is look at those multiple barriers to girls' education. So yeah, just wants to agree with those points that were made. Thanks.
And Jamie, you talked about what is a very dire situation in Somalia at the moment, but I'm wondering whether you agree with some of the other panelists, the fact that it's too soon to start talking post-pandemic. We're still very much in the thick of it.
Absolutely, especially with the Delta variant and having to keep personal safety into account. We know that with schools being closed, the more marginalized kids are going to be without learning and have a harder time getting back into the classroom.
Yeah. And Antara, anything that you wanted to comment on from what you've heard from your fellow speakers?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to agree that while it is too early to say post-pandemic, I think we need to start preparing to undo the damage. And for girls, that damage is in many cases significantly more than it is for boys. Because especially for marginalized girls, when they have been home, they have taken on much more of the unpaid care work, a point which many women around the world who have been working from home will empathize with. But also they've been targeted with trafficking, child marriage, and so on. So while education, a point that my colleague from FCDO has made, getting a quality education is really important for all children, especially girls. It is true that simply the act of being in school, being accountable for being present, this child actually being present every day to somebody not in the family, is a protective mechanism for many vulnerable girls, especially adolescent girls.
Okay, well, Antara, thank you. And thank you to all of our panelists. I know you're going to stay on the line because we're going to come back and get your further reflections as the conversation continues. But in the meantime, I'd like to invite back Sharon, Sharon Tao, who's the Education Director and Team Leader of the Girls' Education Challenge, to also provide your perspective, Sharon, on why girls' education is so very important and how the GEC is, of course, supporting that objective as well. Sharon.
Great. Thank you, Hannah. And thank you to all of our panelists. For me, as someone who's taught in government primary schools in Tanzania and Rwanda, as well as implemented system strengthening education programs in Ghana, Uganda, Sierra Leone, I am very aware of the countless groups of children who experience constraint on their capabilities to learn. And these include children with disabilities, children from ethnic minorities, children displaced by emergency or conflict, as well as children living in extreme rural or impoverished conditions. Whilst both boys and girls make up these excluded groups, the constraints that are experienced, be it due to extreme poverty, displacement, or disability, are compounded and multiplied when they're experienced by girls, as Antara just pointed out. So, for example, boys and girls' education suffers if they're expected to work and bring income to the family, but girls will have the added constraints of extra domestic duties, cooking, cleaning, collecting water, caring for sons, vulnerability to sexual violence and harassment, menstruation, not having sanitary pads for this, and in some contexts, expectations of early marriage and FGM. So as we know, and we'll be discussing further today, these constraints have been exacerbated by COVID-19, as Sally pointed out. And so these are the reasons why we need to have a definitive focus on girls' education. And I just want to be clear that this is not meant to overlook or dismiss the significant constraints and exclusion that boys also face. But as I noted, any constraints experienced by boys due to poverty, conflict, national school closures, or lockdowns are often compounded and multiplied when experienced by girls. And this is often due to unequal gender norms and power dynamics that operate to different degrees in every corner of the globe. So with a concerted focus on addressing those compounded and multiplied constraints that girls experience, we can then start to have a more equal society with more equal opportunities to contribute to it. And that's where the Girls' Education Challenge comes in.
Okay, now is probably then a good time for a bit of a deeper dive that we were going to provide on the Girls' Education Challenge itself and the vital work that's being done. So Sharon, I hand back to you in your capable hands.
Great, thank you, Hannah. Well, I would like to first start with a video that provides an overview of the Girls' Education Challenge and how it aims to strengthen the educational opportunities for the world's most marginalized girls.
If you educate a girl, you're doing a whole thing for your whole community and society. Why do you have to differentiate from a boy and a girl?
Ina shekara 13 lokacin aka ce za a man aure.
داخل بتاع الدكان نظر شديد ما بنقدر نرسلكم مدرسة سوا.
ተፈጥሯዊ የምንላቸው ደግሞ ትምህርት ቤት እንድንቀር ለምሳሌ ማንስትሬሽን sometimes you may find that they don't have sanitary towel ሰው ሰራሽ የምንላቸው የቤተሰብ ጫና ማለት ነው። ቤተሰብ በእኛ ላይ የሚያደርጉብን የስራ ጫና ሆኖ ወይም
buri muka dora mata domin ita ce farkon muka sata a makaranta.
I want my girls to change their attitude so that they do as men do.
Asome zaidi mwalimu nimefika ya piti nimeona kwa kama daktari.
ba littafin da za a daga mun ba zan iya karanta shi ba.
ታች ግን ስማር ሳለ እሱ 12ኛ ክፍል ትደርሳለህ የሚል ሐሳብ አልነበራቸውም።
Great. I'll be honest in saying that the first few times I viewed this video, I was quite emotional because it makes so clear the multiple and compounded and unequal constraints that girls face with regard to being able to reach their fullest learning potential. But as I mentioned, this is where the Girls' Education Challenge comes in. So although the video featured some of these statistics, I just wanted to reiterate that the GEC is a 13-year, £855 million investment by the UK government, which began in 2012 and will end in 2025. As such, it is the largest global fund for girls' education, reaching over 1.5 million marginalized girls in 17 countries across Africa and Asia, which includes fragile and conflict-affected states. The GEC entails 41 projects delivered over by 30 implementing partners, including INGOs, technology-focused companies, and grassroots organizations. And although there is great variety in the size and scope of the 41 projects, all of them aim to support the most marginalized girls, either those who dropped out or never attended school, or those who may be enrolled in school but who are at the most risk of dropping out. The GEC projects work closely with schools, teachers, parents, communities, and governments to address the multiple and compounded constraints on girls' educational opportunities, whether it's at national level, at school level, in communities, or indeed inside their homes. And through this holistic approach, highly marginalized girls are able to meaningfully participate in formal and non-formal education and improve their learning, well-being, and quality of life, and eventually transition into safe, fairly paid work. Now, the GEC was originally set up as a challenge fund to explore a wide range of approaches to strengthen the global evidence base on what works for girls' education, particularly those most marginalized. And the GEC, the access to these multiple contexts, approaches, and implementing organizations, coupled with our commitment to evaluation and evidence creation, has created a rich seam of knowledge and insight into what works and what doesn't work. And this has helped to inform programming for other UK aid projects, other development agencies, and the wider education sector. So if you want to know what works for girls' education, especially for the most marginalized, the GEC is here to help.
Sharon, thank you very much. A really, really comprehensive overview then of what the GEC has been able to achieve since its launch in 2012. I have to ask, though, I mean, since 2012, particularly in the last 18 months or so, we've had something of the world turning upside down. So I'm wondering now how the GEC has been responding since 2020, should we say, to the global pandemic.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Hannah. That's a very good question. And in order to start answering that, I'd like to play another video that provides an overview of how the Girls' Education Challenge was able to continue learning and safety in the face of national school closures and lockdowns.
Wasichana wote kwenda shule ni muhimu. Itabidi twende na wasichana, tusomesha wasichana waende tupate elimu, ndio watu wakuongoza zaidi huko mbele.
महामारीको अवस्थालाई हेरी विद्यालय तथा विश्वविद्यालयका पठन पाठन तथा परीक्षाहरू हाललाई स्थगित गरिएको छ।
हमरा लागल कि पढ़े वाला मौका नहीं पड़ल।
When the lockdown came, they also affected us, as in the school was closed.
My mom did not have a job. The job was too low.
When I come to school, I usually see that I'm safe, because if you look the way children are at home, there are those who have been pregnant. School is better than home.
जतिखेर चाहिँ सार्वजनिक परिवहन र सार्वजनिक आवाजाही चाहिँ सम्पूर्ण रूपले ठप्प थियो, त्यतिखेर हाम्रा सहभागीहरूसँग पुग्नु हाम्रो लागि सबैभन्दा ठूलो चुनौतीको विषय। र इनिशियली यसलाई हामीले चाहिँ मोबाइल फोन मार्फत पढाउन सुरु गर्यौं। केही महिना पढाइसकेपछि हामीलाई के लाग्यो भने हामीले चाहिँ यो भन्दा बढी वाइडर कम्युनिटीमा पुग्नु छ, यो भन्दा बढी सहभागीहरूलाई हामीले चाहिँ यो कार्यक्रममा इन्भल्भ गर्नु छ भनेपछि हामीले मोबाइललाई चाहिँ त्यही केही समयपछि थाती राखेर अडियो डिभाइस र पेन ड्राइभको माध्यमबाट पढाउन सुरु गर्यौं।
This multimedia found them really helped me. They keep me busy, away from stresses of our families.
विद्यार्थी के उपस्थिति कते आयल नहीं आयल वो सब रिकॉर्ड राखी के होमवर्क कते कैले हैं नहीं कैले वो सब संकलन करके रखी छलिए।
ኮቪድ በፊት በየትምህርት ቤት ሳይቱ እያስተማሩ ነበር። አሁን ደግሞ ኮቪድ ከተከሰተ በኋላ ቤት ለቤት ትምህርት ላይ እንገኛለን።
ርቀታቸውን በጠበቀ ሁኔታ ሶስት እናስተምራለን። አሁን ላይ ቤት ለቤት በማስተማር ላይ እንገኛለን።
ጠላኦ አኒሻዮ ጠላኦ ኡታኒ የሄዳመን ቢረ ወዳ እገነ ነባጣ ያነ ዱቸን ባራቴን ተነሚኔ ሚኔ ባራኪን ሳይጥ ባራቾ ከነጠ የሸገለተ
ችግራቸውን ዛሬ አንድ ተማሪ ከቀረ እስከ ቤት ድረስ ሄጄ ችግራቸውን ጠይቄ በወላጅም ችግር ካለ በተማሪም ችግር ካለ ወደ ትምህርት ቤት እንዲመጡ ማድረግ ነው።
Learning is fun because of the teachers. They make it much more fun. I want to reach a stage of PhD, if I may.
Forget about the challenges you are going through. See as something that is smoothing for you your way. So work towards your ambition and don't lose hope. Everything will be okay with you, inshallah.
Thanks. So as you saw in the video, national school closures and lockdowns created a massive disruption to project activities in all 17 countries in which the GEC operates. And in the initial weeks, it wasn't known how long school closures and lockdowns would go for, and there was little information about what alternative education provision would be put in place. Previous crises suggested that the lockdown restrictions would impact the poorest families most severely, leading to heightened vulnerability to sexual exploitation, early marriage, and domestic violence for girls. And the GEC's first response was to take stock of the new circumstances and focus energies on maintaining contact with girls, to monitor their well-being and safety, distribute hand-washing items, and provide information about COVID-19. Many of the projects in this period aligned their activities with national COVID responses and used their community-based networks to reach and support at least 2/3 of the girls in that initial 3-month period. After and during this immediate response to the unknowns of COVID, the GEC projects carried out rapid assessments to better understand the effects of the pandemic and make adaptations to their activities based on evidence. Overall, as we've kind of already discussed, there were findings where the types and degrees of COVID impacts on girls certainly varied from country to country, as well as from rural to urban contexts, but a common theme emerged. And irrespective of country and context, COVID undoubtedly exacerbated and created new constraints on girls' educational opportunities and life chances. So, for example, school closures and lockdowns increased girls' domestic chore burden as they began to care for siblings and sick relatives. As you saw in the film, girls who might not have had access to mobile phones, radios, or electricity prior to COVID were disadvantaged even further, as access to these items were often necessary for distance learning activities. And highly marginalized girls, such as girls with disabilities, also faced increased stigma, discrimination, and safeguarding risks. And given this learning, many projects then adapted their activities to tackle these exacerbated constraints. So, for example, in order to address girls' inability to access government-led radio and TV lessons, many GEC projects deployed multiple types of learning activities to support the most marginalized. These included the production and distribution of printed worksheets and learning materials, creating audio lessons to be accessed via distributed speakers or radios, and when restrictions eased, the formation of community-based learning groups to provide further support and follow-up. In terms of girls' safety and well-being, GEC projects reported increases in sexual violence and domestic violence, as well as increases in early marriage and pregnancy. There were also impacts on girls' mental health, with increased levels of anxiety and, unfortunately, cases of attempted suicide. Given this situation, many projects then provided psychological first aid training for teachers and mentors and used the community-based learning groups to do weekly well-being checks and continue life skills training with girls. Many projects also engaged parents and communities about gender-based violence, early marriage, and pregnancy. And in regards to returning to school upon national reopenings, GEC projects were estimating and reporting a degree of dropout due to early marriages, fear of COVID transmission, economic migration, or exacerbated poverty, which left many families unable to afford school items such as uniforms and stationery. Successful project pivots to tackle these challenges have included training teachers on dropout prevention, engaging parents to assuage COVID transmission fears, providing remedial and catch-up classes, and support for school-going costs. Unfortunately, some countries have reclosed schools as a result of further waves of COVID, so many of these activities will and have continued in order to ensure girls return to school.
Sharon, thank you. I just want to interrupt your flow just for 1 second, because you mentioned there about how the GEC has been supporting girls with different types of disabilities, for example. And just if we can just take one question from the audience, and this is exactly to that. How has the GEC been providing educational support for girls with different types of disability? I'm wondering if I can just put that question to you now before we continue on with the programme.
Sure. So we have several projects that focus primarily on that highly marginalized group. Leonard Cheshire, CSU in Uganda, they are both doing really remarkable work, particularly prior to COVID with regard to highly marginalized girls. But during COVID, they were absolutely reaching out to families, doing face-to-face follow-ups to make sure that these girls are not being marginalized further by their communities or families. Certainly, there was a lot of work with assistive devices. Again, a real consciousness about the fact that sort of government-led radio and television lessons that, really took hold in a lot of countries were absolutely, there was an oversight or a blind spot with regard to children with disability, particularly with hearing and hearing difficulties. So they really did step up their work with regard to making sure that those blind spots were covered and, making sure that those girls weren't overlooked in the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, and it's obviously been a huge adaptation for everyone around the globe. Absolutely. And the GEC and GEC projects will have learnt an awful lot through the course of the last 18 months or so. I'm wondering now if you can highlight just one key learning that we should all take away from the sort of experience of the pandemic.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say one of the key learnings that features from the GEC is that community members and community-based groups were integral to the successful delivery of activities during school closures and lockdowns. Prior to COVID, the GEC projects that had already partnered with community-based structures such as school management committees, parent support groups, community protection committees, these projects were all able to quickly pivot in the face of school closures by drawing on these partners to deliver the small learning groups, to monitor girls' well-being, and to preserve and strengthen safeguarding and child protection pathways. The experience of COVID has really brought to the fore how community structures and members have really stepped in to supplement, or in many cases replace, the national education provision during school closures and lockdowns. As we seek to build back better, learning from the GEC really calls for a new strategic approach to partnering with community-based structures in order to build resilience into education systems.
Well, thank you, Sharon. It's a really comprehensive overview then of what the GEC has done and also learned in response to the pandemic. I want to bring back now our panel of speakers to reflect on post-pandemic planning and response as well, how your organisations have been responding to the challenges and opportunities, of course, of building back better. So, Antara, would you like to kick us off on this question, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Hannah. First of all, Angai, we believe our work on girls' education and gender equality in education is very much geared towards addressing SDG 4, but also SDG 5, which is preventing and mitigating discrimination and violence against all girls and women. So over the last year and a half, I think the main thrust of our work has been to empower and support young feminist activists who are part of our network of practitioners we work with around the world to do work that they believe is required in local contexts. So, for example, in Nigeria, we have a young feminist activist who, through her own grassroots organization, developed a GBV hotline, a gender-based violence hotline. We have another one in Sierra Leone who advocated at national education decision-making tables for budgets for community learning centers. In a program that we're doing called Gender at the Center Initiative in 8 countries in Western and Central Africa, the NGOs we work with on the ground, they have done community awareness raising, they have done national televised debates on why invest in girls' education. And yes, of course, we wouldn't want that to be a debate, but it did raise some really important questions and brought to fore important evidence on why we do need to invest more funds in getting girls to school. And then finally, we did a lot of work around evidence building. So we supported global evidence building campaigns and initiatives from UNESCO, Malala Fund, and so on why girls are more vulnerable at times of school closure. We amplified messages around violence. So it's not just girls facing violence, it's women facing violence. And the same reason that women have suffered more because of the pandemic in terms of violence than men is the same reason why girls suffer more than boys. So amplifying those messages, we've been doing some very interesting research around gender norms. So what prevents a family from sending a girl to school, or what makes a family value a boy's education more than a girl's education? And sometimes the reason that that value is made is not to is to the detriment of the boy as well. No child should be put under pressure of providing for his entire family when he grows up. That's also a harmful gender norm. So building the evidence on how these gender norms are different, and yet there's this underlying connection of patriarchy across all of them. We've done some interesting work also with FCDO around financing for gender equality in education, what this looks like, what this should look like. Not only how do you increase allocation of funding to girls' education, but how do you do more with what you have already? And then finally, and this is probably the bit I'm most excited about, we are now looking at how do we share all of this information and evidence that exists on all of our website? And I was looking at all of the wonderful data and statistics that Sharon was sharing. How do we convert that into formats that the marginalized girls, and in some cases boys themselves, need to take up this information? We're talking about them. How do we share this information? How do we create this information? So we're not talking about them, but we're actually sharing this information with them. This is what we have understood about your world. This is what we have understood about your experience. Does this resonate for you? Are you aware that in your community, in your country, there are X million girls who are impacted by the same issues you're impacted by? Yeah. And that is what we are going to keep doing more of.
Antara, thank you. I'm going to hand over now to Elaine for your reflections on this.
Thanks, Hannah. I think I'm going to take up the theme of sustainability and accountability, because I'm going to talk about the project I lead, which is AGI, Accountability for Gender Equality in Education, which deals in quite a dry way with indicators and counting and presenting information. But what underpins the framework we've developed in the AGI project is a huge concern that I think was coming out of the video, was coming out of the things Sharon was talking about, that so much divides us in the world, but education is what connects us. And that through the kinds of solidarities and connection and sustaining these initiatives is a path through to connection. And we have to be accountable to each other for what we do. The AGI framework has broadened the framework of looking at monitoring and evaluating girls' education so that it's taking account both of the resources that are allocated, the ways in which people convert opportunities into outcomes, and the ways in which we enact a kind of social justice project, and the kinds of psychosocial support, the forms of care that we saw in the video and people have talked about as coming as being a feature of what we've understood through COVID, that schools are not just about projects for economic growth. They're not just about projects for people to develop an instrumental vision of education. They're a way in which we enact our vision of a better world. And I think that vision that's already expressed through SDG 4 and in other SDGs, we need to work on that and increase and amplify the inclusion and equity messages, and then develop the indicators so that we can be accountable to each other and to that poorest girl in the video who spoke to us, and we won't forget her words. Thank you.
Jamie, then over to you. Your reflections on what you've just heard and also this sort of post-pandemic planning phase.
Thanks. I echo a lot of what has been said, and especially looking at the power of education, as Elaine highlighted, that the two faces of education, that it can mitigate exclusion, but it also can exacerbate exclusion, as we've seen during the pandemic. So how do we harness the power of education to build back better? From a high level, USAID is proud to endorse the G7's Declaration on Girls' Education, Recovering from COVID-19 and Unlocking Agenda 2030. And we're proud to support the two ambitious milestones related to access and learning. First, of 40 million more girls in school by 2026, and 20 million more girls reading by age 10 or the end of the primary cycle. So globally, USAID is advancing this work with context-specific solutions and strategies. First, helping the most marginalized learners, especially girls and young women, get back on track after COVID-19, ensuring that educational materials and instruction are inclusive and empower young learners of all gender identities, that we provide safe learning opportunities for women and girls, especially those in places affected by conflict and crisis and displacement. Like has been said, really promoting gender in the generation of evidence and research. And then lastly, collaborating and coordinating with local, regional, and international stakeholders to elevate gender issues in policy and in practice, such as this event today.
Jamie, thank you. And last but by no means least, Sally, over to you for your reflections on this. And then once Sally's finished, we can all have a chat about what we've all heard.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Hannah. And obviously, a lot of really helpful comments I'm not going to repeat. I just want to mention this event is about girls' education, but I think one of the learnings, certainly from richer countries that have had school lockdowns, is the fact, I think we've all realised how important teachers are and how much interactive learning is, and that you can't teach by just providing a bit of paper and a PowerPoint and expect your child to learn. I think some of us all went through that experience at the beginning. So the role of teaching, the profession of teaching, is so important. So I think in all the advocacy as we go forward on promoting the importance of educating girls, we also need to ensure that we have, good quality teaching and teachers. And we do know as well, obviously, the importance of female teachers for girls in particular. But let's, as we try and build back better, let's make sure valuing teachers is a big part of that story. And that's just a sort of personal play of mine. So my colleague from USAID has, in terms of FCDO and going forward, a couple of things. My colleagues already mentioned that obviously the UK has also been big part of these new ambitious targets as we move forward of 40 million more girls back in school and 20 more million learning, and that we've got this great global commitment now on this, which is fabulous. Tied to that, we've also got, you probably know, we have a girls' education envoy, Helen Grant, who's doing some great sort of advocacy work around the globe with leaders, ministers of education, talking about the importance of investing and supporting girls' education. And also we have a gender envoy in Alicia Herbert doing the same, so bringing together the gender equality and the education element, which Antara speaks so eloquently about whenever I hear her talking. I think the other thing I really want to mention, though, well, a couple of things. One is the importance of evidence and doing it properly. So I know, and I know a lot of people have probably put in the chat, there's been a lot of concern around the reduced overseas aid budget overall. There's been a lot in the press around that. And I think it's, obviously concerning for people, but, just a reminder, we've still got £10 billion worth of aid going out and 400 million specifically on education going forward. And it has been a sort of unprecedented time. So, yes, of course, resources and investment are important, but also what I'm proud of in terms of the SCDO is our expertise and our use of evidence. So to ensure and reassure people that, every single pound of that needs to be really well spent in a sort of using the cliche, but actually, being innovative and doing new ideas and pioneering. And that's why, again, really proud of the Girls' Education Challenge, because it wasn't afraid in a way to fail with a few programs and projects, because we needed to try things out. And I think that's hugely important. But yes, so tied to that in terms of the building back better gender, if you want to use that term, really learning, and we're doing that right now. We're still in the pandemic. We're looking at what worked well, what didn't work well, different types of technologies. The obvious one, not going too high tech, the work that the GEC has done on the community side of things. And we need to work quickly because, as I said, this is still happening now. So we can actually use that evidence and feed it back. And the importance of resilience going forward. We cannot lose that message. And it does worry me that, we'll move on too quickly. And we've already got the lessons from the Ebola crisis, for example. A lot of money and resources were put into WASH, for example, in schools, and making sure that not necessarily as resilient as it could have been potentially. I mean, they've done some fantastic work. So let's just also really think about that. But the use of evidence research, and just to say, really looking forward to the work that the GEC is going to be doing. We're funding a really interesting evaluation of the GEC, and that's going to bring some fabulous lessons for us all going forward. So just to sort of flag that that's coming. So please use that. So I'll finish there, Hannah, so you don't have to shut me up.
Well, I'm not going to shut you up, actually. I'm going to ask you another question, because a lot of what you were just talking about was about the importance of evidence-based research as well. And one question that's come from the audience is the GEC has been evidence-driven from the outset. How important does Sally and other colleagues, other panellists, think this evidence-based approach has been? Sally, perhaps you want to respond to this and about the importance of evidence, of being evidence-driven. And Antara, I know you were nodding your head through that as well, so perhaps you can follow up on it after Sally.
So, of course, it's important. I've got a slight advantage here because I was involved at the start on the design of the GEC, and one of the so I think it's evidence, but it's also the right type of evidence. And I think certainly at the beginning of the GEC, and we've done a lot of learning. There was quite a lot of qualitative work, which is hugely important on girls' education. I'm not saying it's either or, but there was slightly less sort of quantitative work, and bringing those two together and trying to really get some really robust sort of RCTs built into the things. And I'm definitely sort of agnostic on I think this is about bringing together different types of evidence. So I think that was important for girls' education. But I think the other thing is this, and Elaine talks about this really eloquently as well. This is about power as well and influence. So it's also about getting, you don't just present a piece of evidence and that changes people's minds. We've all been around long enough to know that. You have to be able to, to influence, to do the advocacy work, but also just to be in the right place at the right time. And that's why in FCDO we have this sort of technical cadre of education advisors who are working on the ground, partnering, building trust and using that evidence. And I really believe in that model.
Okay. And Tara, do you want to pick up on what Sally's just said?
Sure. I think what I'd like to add, I agree with everything Sally said. What I want to add is that evidence is only accurate on gender gaps if it takes place with a gender lens. I was recently on a global call where a global organization actually came out and said, "Oh, we did a review of data and we found that there are no gender gaps in children accessing remote learning through COVID." And that's absolutely ridiculous. And when you look at how they came to that conclusion, it was based on household data surveys, which always include a lot of extrapolation to begin with when they get into a global database. And then there was further extrapolation for COVID. So I mean, ideally, there should have been a sanity check, right? Like, are we really saying that there's going to be no gender gaps in developing countries where pre-COVID, there were already significant gender gaps? And we know that the digital gender divide between girls and boys is massive. In some countries, in South Asia, for example, it's 40%. And there are parents who will not be embarrassed to say, I will not let my adolescent daughter use a phone because the honor of my family is at stake. So I think having that gender lens and asking those questions when we look at the data, when we build the data is really important. And then finally, to be able to do it with humility, recognizing that gender inequality is something that every woman and girl in this world faces. There isn't a single country in the world that has achieved gender equality. So the same forces that keep all of us here on this call thinking about, do I go out here at night? What do I wear? And how am I coming home? Are the same forces operating behind whether an adolescent girl decides to go to a community learning center that she hasn't been to before or not. So recognizing those linkages, I think, is also really important to build evidence with a gender lens, but also empathy.
And Elaine, I wonder if I can come to you now to maybe respond to what Antara was just saying then about, data is obviously very important, evidence that builds data to inform policies. But also, I mean, Antara mentioned in her initial comment about the fact that, data needs to be useful to the boys and girls who are going to be directly affected by it, as a result of these policies as well. Your thoughts on that and everything else you've heard?
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah. This is going to, again, sound like quite a starchy academic comment, but, data can never do it on its own. There's no such thing as powerful as a good theory. And the good theories we have, which are about the importance of gender equality, the importance of human rights, the importance of inclusivity, those are the things we have to use to critically review the data we look at. That gender isn't the same thing, and that, that there are these huge divides in power and knowledge. Who has the power? Who has the knowledge? Whose voices are heard? Whose aren't? Those are things we have to be very attentive to. Absolutely evidence-driven policy, but evidence-driven policy that's self-critical and reflexive about the methods through which it's been generated and the ways in which it's going to be used. And I think that's part of the kind of joining up that we need. And, this is a really important beginning for that.
Lots more questions coming in as well. And I hope that through the next sort of half hour, 25 minutes, that we've still got time to get to some of them. So thank you to the audience who are sending those in. But in the meantime, I'd like to now pass back to Sharon, who's going to provide us with a bit more of a forward look as to where the GEC is headed and how it will contribute then to this phrase, building back better.
Thanks, Hannah. And thank you to all of our panelists to kind of highlight the importance of evidence, because that is certainly one of the directions we're going in with our forward look. I'd like to start first with an acknowledgement that although there have been great gains made with vaccination programs in the global north, these gains have yet to be realized in many global south countries. And so we're already seeing third waves of school closures currently happening in contexts like Uganda and Zambia, Nepal and Pakistan. And so we're clearly not out of the woods yet with regard to disrupted education. And so there will be a need to ensure the continuation of learning and safety for children, particularly marginalized girls, for the next few years to come. So given this situation, the GEC is focused on three main things. First, consolidating and synthesizing all of our evidence and learning with regard to responding to national school closures and lockdowns. We have 41 projects across 17 countries that we've been drawing best practice from, which essentially provides a contextualized menu of options to ministries, development agencies, and the broader education community that they can use when developing programs or adapting for a future that likely entails multiple school openings and closures. Second, we will be using our evidence to propose new ways to build resilience into education systems. And so I was really pleased to hear that as a point of importance. One of those resounding pieces of evidence that came out of the multiple projects and contexts, as I mentioned earlier, was that community members and structures provide a safety net for when formal school systems shut down, either entirely or for particular regions or grades. And education systems can strengthen their resilience to future waves of COVID or other shocks like natural disasters or emergencies through more explicit partnerships with communities. We've looked at the precedent and evidence surrounding community health workers and how they've increased access and resilience to health systems across the globe. And we're very mindful of not blindly transplanting models, but we have thought through and proposed a very plausible development of cadres of community education workers who could also strengthen the coverage and functioning of education systems, both in the face of pandemics and in more day-to-day circumstances. Finally, we aim to be the thought and practice leaders regarding out-of-school girls. Prior to COVID, the GEC focused on girls who are out of school and those in the formal system most at risk of dropping out. During the height of COVID, essentially all children were out-of-school children, which is why GEC projects were already focused on and were able to pivot so rapidly. And supporting out-of-school girls is what we do. And given SDG 4 and the G7 targets to get 40 million girls into school within the next 5 years, the GEC is very well positioned to help with this task. COVID has definitely thrown into sharp relief the need to utilize non-formal education and strategies to reintegrate children back into education systems. And the GEC projects did this well prior to COVID. They very much excelled during COVID, and now will be the thought and practice leaders in a post-COVID world. So hopefully, taken together, our aims of providing a menu of best practice options, building resilience into education systems, and being the thought leaders to support out-of-school girls is how we will help governments not only build back better, but build back smarter, build back faster, and fairer for the most marginalized girls.
Sharon, thank you. A really, really helpful look at how the GEC will be supporting governments and leaders in a post-COVID world, of course. And in the spirit then of looking into the future, particularly towards the Global Education Summit later on this week, I'd like to invite our speakers, our panelists back to give a final set of reflections on what message you'd like to give to world leaders who will be attending at the summit this week. Jamie, you're up first. If you were in a room with them and you had your 60 seconds to make your pitch, what would you say?
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks, everyone. I would say the case for investing in girls' education is clear. The return on investment in investing in girls' education doubles or triples development dollars. And we see that not only in getting young women prepared for the labor force, but also for their roles within families. As sisters, as mothers, they can influence so much more when they are given more opportunities to learn and grow.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. And Tara, over to you then. What would be your message to world leaders as they go into this summit this week?
Here's my elevator pitch. Commit to education and gender equality. Pay for girls' education and gender equality in education. Dedicate resources. Dedicate social capital to those who work for gender equality in education. When you're developing budgets to build toilets for girls and boys, add 10% more to teach and orient girls and boys about puberty and menstrual hygiene management and understanding their bodies. When you set up committees for textbook reviews, use gender checklists to ensure that those textbooks show women as doctors and scientists and men as fathers and homemakers. When you review attendance records of schools, ask for and analyze which gender is being left behind and of which quintile of which province, and pay special attention to children with disabilities. Voices are important, and the summit has clearly raised voices for girls' education, but action is even more important. So now we need to roll up our sleeves and confront the dire emergency that we are facing today for every marginalized child, certainly, but especially for every girl.
And Tara, that was a fantastic 60-second elevator pitch. And who knows, maybe some world leaders or their teams have been tuning in for this as well. So they may even take note. Elaine, quite a lot to follow, but over to you.
Okay, I'm going to say this with emphasis. Please don't use girls' education and the lives of the poorest girls in the world to solve development problems those girls didn't create. Girls' education is an area of policy focus and practice, and it should be linked with globally agreed, substantive and detailed agendas, which we already have on human rights, women's rights, and gender equality. We need to challenge and change the injustices that cause the problems for girls' education in the first place. And we have to draw on the knowledge of people who know best. Those are knowledge of people in contexts of poverty, inequality, and vulnerability, and particularly those girls, to build the information and policy frameworks we need to help put in place education systems that work for people and that will allow them to expand their experience of human rights and deepen experiences of equality and social protection and sustain the institutions that are crucial to us all in the world. So I think I want them to understand supporting girls' education and projects well is about building a connective network of people, of organizations and institutions for humans development. Girls' education is not a simple solution, and don't treat it as such. It's a complex solution to a complex set of problems, and it needs to be recognized of that. And we need to understand all the people who need to be drawn into the process. It's not a gesture. It needs to be planned for, it needs to be evaluated, and it needs to be connected well with other work. So keep on connecting. Join up.
Very impassioned. Thank you very much, Elaine. Sally, over to you now. Your reflections and what you hope to see from world leaders come the end of the week.
Yeah, I guess one of them is my boss as a civil servant, so I don't. Look. I mean, I have to say, I really hope that some of those world leaders will see one of those videos, because I do feel that actually it's really. I think my message is not the message that should be heard. I think it should be the message of the girls that have actually lives have been transformed by going into school and seeing the benefit from it. And I think that, that there's nothing more powerful than hearing those stories, to really make the case. I think the second point is carpe diem. As I said right at the start, look, I've been working and as my dear friend Elaine has, working on girls' education, educating girls the whole for many years, and I think we've got a moment here where we've got sign up to some really ambitious targets. We've had that huge impact of COVID, and we're really back into a serious crisis. So now is the time, and to really step up and see this as a huge priority as we go forward. And it's really challenging. There's budget situations in all countries. But if we don't do this now, it's going to have a huge impact on all of us in 5, 10, 15 years' time. So I think, it's carpe diem, and it's girls and boys. It's all marginalised children. So let's just have a great week, and let's just hope that everyone does step up and fulfil their commitments and promises.
Okay, Sally, thank you. Thank you, actually, to all of our speakers, our panellists today. You've given us, and of course the world leaders who will be attending the summit this week, a lot of food for thought. So my thanks to all of you. David Armstrong, who I'm sure has been listening intently to everything that we've been speaking about over the last hour or so. David, you're on the line, and I know you'd like to say a few words now.
Yeah, look, just two things, Hannah. Thank you. Firstly, my message to the leaders this week, I mean, as a PwC business guy, I'd say, even if you're not moved by all of the very compelling arguments around fairness, inclusion, and equity that we have rehearsed in this session today, do it because it makes business and economic sense, and it has a massive impact on how we're all going to build back better and build economies going forward from where we're at in relation to COVID. So even if you're not moved by equity, do it for the economy. The secondly, Hannah, if I may, I mean, I think we have a short video that highlights some of what we're going to hear from in the rest of the sessions today. Remember, as we said at the beginning, this is the first of 10 sessions in total today. And I think we've got a short video to explain what's coming up in the rest of the day.
On Monday, 26 July 2021, during the Global Education Summit, FAWE, Plan International African Union Liaison Office, Rosalia Memorial Trust, and the South African Sexual Reproductive Health Trust will be hosting a side event entitled A Multi-Stakeholder Approach to Educating Girls in Vulnerable Situations. During this side event, there will be different experts from government, civil society, discussing the challenges that girls face that makes them be out of school from birth until adulthood. This is the time to speak for our girls, the successes and gaps. Join us to discuss how we can make their lives better.
You'll have the opportunity to learn the key successes and recommendations from our highly impactful FCDO funded projects. We'll offer the opportunity for live Q&A afterwards. We look forward to welcoming you.
The Aga Khan Foundation is launching its global report outlining 10 key priorities for delivering girls' education programs in fragile context. Join us on July 26 for an exciting session with our partners, Save the Children, CARE and Catholic Relief Services, to discuss why these priorities are important and how we can support our girls in fragile contexts to go to school, stay in school and learn. We'll be live from 3 p.m. BST.
Too many girls are unable to access schooling, and too many girls did not return to schools as they reopened after the pandemic. This panel discussion, moderated by Professor Asha Kanwar of the Commonwealth of Learning, will explore these issues as part of Girls' Education Day on 26 July.
That love to invite you to our event, Leave No One Behind, Financing Inclusive Education for Girls and Children with Disability, that is happening at 1:30 to 3 p.m. BST. The event, which is being convened by ActionAid International and UNSEFA, aims to identify positive steps that the government and other stakeholders can take to ensure that girls and children with disability are not left behind.
Join in on 26 July at 1:30 p.m. UK time for the event Education and Safety, Listening to What Build Back Better Means for Girls. This event is co-hosted by World Vision, Malaika, Commonwealth and Development and the UK Foreign. Nothing about us should be discussed without us. So come to this panel and hear the challenges girls face.
The UN Girls Education Initiative (UNGAI) and Girls Not Bright are co-hosting a side event to the GPE Global Education Summit, transforming social norms to end child marriage and advance girls' education. Child marriage serves as a barrier to education for many girls, yet ending child marriage and transforming social norms are rarely explicit education goals. This can change. Girls Not Bright will share emerging learning from their Education Out Loud funded project, working to address child marriage and promote girls' education in Francophone West Africa. Representatives from youth-led organizations, donor countries and regional CSOs will come together to call for a greater focus on gender norms for education funding, planning, and programming. It is time to target social norms to advance girls' education, end child marriage, and promote transformative change for a gender-equal world. Join us!
There's clearly lots to come and some very passionate people who are going to be leading the drive over the next day at least as well, and certainly into the summit. Thanks also to David for your reflections on what we've been talking about over the last hour or so. Now, before we close, I understand that the GEC is inviting everyone, all of our viewers included, to show their support for girls' education in quite an interesting way. So Sharon, over to you to explain.
Great, thank you. Yes, that's right, Hannah. We want to send a very loud and clear message to the leaders attending the Global Education Summit that men, women, and children around the world are committed to seeing every girl receive a quality education. So we at the GEC have aligned with the Global Partnership for Education's Raise Your Hand campaign. And if you are on Twitter and search for our GEC account, you will find an invitation to raise your hand for girls' education. So please feel free to retweet or reply to the tweet, I am raising my hand for girls' education, with your own reason why girls' education is so important. For example, I'm raising my hand for girls' education because it is a fundamental right that too many girls do not yet have. Or I'm raising my hand for girls' education to unleash the potential of my country. So please feel free to invite or challenge other people to give their reasons for raising their hand for girls' education. It could be a friend, it could be a colleague, maybe even your heads of state. So please get involved this week and go to all of the brilliant Girls' Education Day events that we have coming up. Keep telling your stories, keep putting pressure on your leaders. And as we always say at the Girls' Education Challenge, always, always, always keep girls at the center of everything you do.
Brilliant stuff, Sharon. Thank you. Now, I love the Raise Your Hand for Girls' Education call to action. I will absolutely make sure that I do that as soon as we come off this call. I'd like to thank, though, now all of the partners who are involved in today's Girls' Education event. I'd like to thank also all of our speakers. We heard from Sally Gear, Jamie Oberlander, and Tara Ganguly, and Elaine Unterhalter. And I'd also like to extend my huge thanks to Sharon Tao and David Armstrong for spearheading the Girls' Education Challenge and bringing us all together here on Girls' Education Day at the Global Education Summit. It has been a truly excellent event so far. I really look forward to attending certainly more of today's events as well. Lots more to come, as we saw in that video just now. I hope you're excited for it. Thank you to those of you tuning in online, and for those of you who are joining us on a recording, welcome. Thank you. Hope you found it useful as well. Remember, everyone, to raise your hand for girls' education. Thanks for now. Bye.